Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to CoRA. At this time, I would like to ask if there's anybody who has a new employee that would like to introduce to the group or have any announcements that they would like. Hey, I sounds good. So we'll just jump right into it. So today our first speaker will be Mohammed Ita. He is the senior accountant for fixed assets, and he will be talking to us about all things capital equipment and how that relates to grants and our portfolios. So without further ado, Mohammed, take it away. You're on mute. Mohammed, you're on mute.
Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yep, all good.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to preach the choir. All folks that I all partnered with for a long time, and it's great to see you all again. We have been there for a long time together. We worked on it. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about capital equipment. So we're gonna dive in from the perspective of the central office, from business assets perspective, and trying to garner your attention and streamline the process. Imagine that we integrate our capital equipment seamlessly without any issues for innovation and science work that's being done. So we're gonna start first of all to just define what's capital equipment, and is the definition is very, very important because it's just it gives us a great importance on recognizing the capital equipment from the beginning. And it's as simple as could be. It could have a lot of questions, but this is the simplest terms that we could find. It's just the threshold that we buy. It's not like your coffee machine. It could be above the threshold. It has a useful life. It must be more than 1 year. So it's extensive. The benefit will keep on going, and it's more than my midlife. My New Year resolution, if you would say, will last more than New Year resolution for sure. The equipment asset has to be titled to university. The equipment function as a standalone or as an integral part of a larger system, and it's very important. Please feel free to stop me at any time to have questions. Feel free to ask questions as I go through the slides. I'll make a pause at the end of each slide so you can ask your question. Now, what's the best practices through, you know, um, from our side that we see, and it's recurring issues that we see that could make things more streamlined and more efficient as we go in processing the capital equipments. The most important thing, the spend category, because this is how we recognize the capital equipment. If it's not tagged with the right spend category, it will go away. It will not be under our, it will not channel through the streamline to our group to review. And this is very essential. Included costs, and many people don't know that sometimes we get a lot of requisitions that does have shipping and freight that is not as capital spend category, as it's very integral part of the asset to include the freight, the installation, um, as a capital spend category. Um, the other thing is the milestone payment, and this is a new thing that's coming through nowadays. There's a lot of vendors requiring down payment or for big purchases that they will break down their payments in 20, 30%, 50%, whatever terms they arrive to. So in that case, we need to break down these milestones in the requisition itself because it will make it easier for us for the invoice matching, so it will not create problems later on when we're trying to match the invoicing. And this is very important. It will solve a lot of problems as we're getting through down, the specific terms of each one. The other thing is the capital projects. So now we have new buildings that's being built, and for new construction, we are getting, massive big systems like AV systems or network components or internet. These kind of systems, it requires specific treatment because we need to assign each capital equipment to the assigned location. So it's very important to coordinate and communicate this ahead of time with the business assets group so we can build the requisition in a good way that will segregate these equipments according to their location. This slide is for a code that has a recurring issues that we're getting is people not applying the discount across the requisition lines, and it's very important to apply these discounts across all the lines. And as you see, you can go across and break down the lines and apply this discount to each and every specific lines. Because as you know, we are getting when we have a requisition with multiple lines, when we get the invoice, we are trying to match, and if we are not matching correctly, it will create problems later with the mismatching on procurement. Excluded costs, and some people, there's a lot of confusion about this as well, as we are getting new people, are new to capital equipment. Some people will be confused. Some of the requisitions like big systems, it will have extended warranties contracts included as lines that shouldn't be included as capital equipment and should be segregated and use different spending category. So it will not be capitalized with the main asset. The same with computer hardware or software maintenance contracts that shouldn't be allowed to be capitalized as well. Other thing, consumable supplies. A lot of times with big systems, they will be entered with prepare, starting kits or oils or some samples that is included in the requisition. These kind of consumables shouldn't be allowed to be as capital, so it should use a separate spend category, non-capital spend category, like supplies, lab, other, for example. The other thing, training cost. You remember we talked about the included cost, which is installation. But when training associated with installation, yes, we can capitalize. But if it's training coming separately by itself, this way we don't know if this associated, this doesn't associate with the capital equipment. We cannot capitalize it because it's segregated from the installation. If it's combined with the installation, this way we can capitalize. So I hope this is a clear point.
So I have a question.
Sure.
About software. So you're saying that the software maintenance contract can't be capitalized, but can the original software purchase, like if it's required?
Yes. So if it's yeah, you can complete your question. I'm sorry.
Um, so a lot of time, like when you buy a big piece of equipment, it requires a certain type of software for
Mhm.
it, and you pay like, I don't know, $1,000 to purchase the software. The maintenance is a separate thing, right? So would that software purchase of $1,000, if it's included with the equipment purchase, you can capitalize that. Is
If
that
it's a
correct?
maintenance contract, a
Not
maintenance
on
contracts
a
for the,
maintenance contract though.
not a maintenance contract. If it's a software that is specific for this piece of equipment that comes with a specific piece of equipment, yes, definitely. Like imaging system, we get a lot of imaging system that it has software combined with the hardware. So we have hardware and software to function to the system so it could function. This way, the hardware and software could be combined as capital equipment. And if anyone, our team would like to chime in, please feel free.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to mention if it's software and it's an annual fee that you have to pay for it, then that's not capital. It's only if it's a one-time fee that you're paying for the hardware, then it's capital.
Yes, and this is coming with the other slides that we have about extended or perpetual license of software. We're gonna come to this slide as well.
Okay.
Okay. So preaching to the choir for research administration, grants is a ticking clock, as you all know. So it's very important to categorize and do the due diligence reviewing the terms and conditions for the equipment because it makes a big difference, especially for grants world. So the proper coding, it has a lot of um, um, critical points that we should touch on. The equipment ownership that should be reviewed with the terms and conditions, and you can find it in Workday. You can find it here on, and it's very important to understand who have the ownership for this piece of equipment. Is it owned by university? Is it going to be owned by the sponsoring federal agency or not? Or it has a conditional title, for example. Um, and this require a lot of review for the terms and conditions. And learn how well you have to read the terms and conditions for the notice of award and understanding if there's any special terms coming in after the first, with the consecutive years of the grant. The split funding ETF, of course, confirmation of UVO holds title and that the purchase complies with the ETF cost sharing guidelines. Um, the grant activity, of course, as you know, we have 30 days of the closing coordination with OSP to ensure that the asset purchase are permissible. And is OSP, of course, is aware of any extensions that is coming through or is still in the work for that. Okay. So what happened if we incorrectly categorize capital equipment as not as a capital? And of course, there is a compliance risk, um, loss of critical checks and balances because it doesn't flow through our process. It doesn't come through our fixed assets. It's not categorized correctly in the system, leading to purchase without the proper sponsor approval. If there's a prior approval is required, whatever is the terms is. The asset management issues. So failure to flow through the workday business, we will not have our standard asset processing and tagging process. And this will keep it away from our radar to review and see and include it in our reporting. If any charges, and this is a very potential great risk, as you know, no one will be happy when they find out that FNA charges are not accrued or not proper, categorically done properly in the beginning. You don't like surprises at the end of the grant or after a long period of the grant period. The grant closeout delays, if an error discovered during the closeout, grant may require reopening in workday, accounting adjustment, as you know, required to be done, processed and approved and go through the chain of approvals. As you know, the manual asset entry into business asset, and this is what we are going through, that we have to go and manually, and instead of flowing through the process in our workday, we have to go manually and do the creation of the new asset. Of course, the asset tagging. So if it's not flowing in our system, it's not going to be properly tagged in our system timely. So that's another risk that we're running through. And this will impact the final closeout report, as you can see, and it will impact our government reporting as well. So multiple issues that could happen. Software, and this is again in big concentration about your question about software. To capitalize software, it must have a perpetual license. Ownership, we own the software. It's not a subscription. It's not annual. It's not Netflix. We're paying every month. No. Annual subscription or licenses are not eligible for capitalization. Annual purchases of licenses, subscriptions, upgrades, services are expensed as well, not capitalized. And we should advise to use services, computer software maintenance, or rent software. Multiple year agreements too is not capitalized as well. It will be expensed. So it doesn't matter if it's 10 years, 5 years. If it's term and it has a term, it should be expensed. We all accept the perpetual license for software if it's bought separately. If it's bought with a hardware, yes, it will be capitalized with the hardware. I hope I think this answer provide more clarification on the software.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Um, Another issue that I personally had a encounter when I started with business assets, the upgrades. And upgrades, capital upgrades is being used loosely in the field. So people are using upgrades all the time and saying upgrade. And it kind of took us some reflection to get back and figuring out what is really an upgrade. What's a capital upgrade? It's not a repair. It's not substituting pieces. And if you think about your car, if you have a car and you are doing a capital upgrade, like changing a transmission, changing the engine, it's a significant part of the engine that could be taken out from the car and put in another car. But to change the nuts and bolts, change the tires, is not a capital upgrade. So this is just an example. So we need to clearly, and the communication with the business asset is very important to provide clarification about what's the nature of this upgrade. And this come through the requisition and should be communicated early on, providing the internal memo. What is the upgrade is really about? And what's the purpose of it? Is it gonna extend the life of the capital equipment significantly over many years? Is the benefits will keep on coming, or just to make the asset that was old, make it just functional? That's repair. If it's gonna extend the benefits of the piece of asset, if you're going to extend the life of it, that's a capital upgrade. And we need to identify if there's any limitation with the current system with the upgrade that will resolve. Like if this current asset doesn't function this way, and when we add this capital upgrade, that will enhance the piece of equipment to add these functions. To make this clear to the business assets group, that will make us determine if it's really a capital upgrade. So we need to distinguish the parts being ordered for upgrade, not a repair. Repairs are not capitalized. Equipment or requisition is named upgrade when not an upgrade. This is a common thing that's being practiced. And very common thing like using cameras, like CMOS cameras that's being bought for big microscope or imaging system. If they're buying the piece of camera that's very expensive, CMOS camera, and install it, and you can take it out and put it in other microscope, and you're using it for any system or any microscopy system. This way, we can understand that this is not upgrade. This is the standalone asset because it's above the threshold. It keep function by itself with any other system. That's not upgrade. This is a standalone asset by itself. Any questions regarding upgrades?
So what if it like increases the capacity of something, like your machine will do 100 things and you can buy this new part and it can do 1,000? Is that
That will exactly as a capital upgrade, because when you show to us, and this is come through communication with the field, like I go back and forth with emails, like explain to me how this will enhance the functionality of this piece of equipment. If it was doing X before, but now it's doing XYZ, oh, that will make it so clear, and I can document it, and it makes sense to capitalize this kind of upgrade.
right? But it's not really doing something new. It's just increasing the capacity, right?
Mm-hmm. Enhancing the functionality of the system. If it's doing this kind of like, I have a lot of imaging system that will doesn't have like motorized camera or motorized piece of equipment to add to 3D imaging, for example. That's a significant enhancement of the functionality of the piece of equipment, and this makes sense to be as a capital upgrade. Yep. Okay. Okay. One of the biggest experiences that I have was fabrication. And fabrication is always a fun thing. And I think some of you could be working on this in specific areas. Um, and this is when you start building a piece of equipment, a capital equipment, and you're building from scratch. And this is a process we have to go through, and this process starts with initiating the process by doing the request, the application request, and submitted to by the principal PI. And this request should highlight what's the estimated completion date, what is the description of fabrication, and it's very important to highlight this in the beginning with the fabrication with this form. The form is approved, go through the approval process. OSP will start having a sub grants that will be the place to place all the expenses on it, and it was going to be using non-capital expense. Um, Business assets that later on will take on at the end of the process, at the end of the completion of this building of the asset. Business assets will do their magic behind the scenes by doing the correction, the GL entries that's required to apply and put it in our fixed asset books. Um, the fabrication number will be issued, it will be tagged to the sub grant number. The sub grant will be used for all the purchases across the period of this sub grant. Of course, unlike the former policy in Oracle, we're not going to go about Oracle. This is history. Now we're dealing with Workday. Once the fabrication is completed, business assets will process the journals in the fixed asset book to post the capital equipment. No entries are needed in the common book. A manual asset will be entered in the asset module. The asset will be tagged and placed in service. Here's the fabrication form. You can, if you're in the process, you can use this link for the fabrication form. I'm gonna share this presentation with the group, so hopefully that will be a good source for you to tap into if you need any help. Government property reporting, and of course for the fabrication and for the government property reporting, Joyce, our great treasure, great trooper in our team. She is the one who's handling the fabrication request and the government property reporting, and it's very important to ask her the proper questions. She's available, and she would love to know ahead of time if there is any government reporting or any fabrication. So feel free, please, to contact Joyce with any questions about government reporting or fabrication. The government property requests are sent to OSP to Business Asset Joyce, and for the annual report or closeout, the request should include the documents that are required for the property filing, such as SF 428 or 428P. When the property report is received, the task is set in work day for a property report. Reports are run in workday to determine the assets are purchased for non-award. If the award closed prior to workday, then the reports may need to be run by UBI. The signed property report forms will be saved in the property report and award task, so it should be available. All right. So, any questions? Here is our team, and I would like to introduce the whole team. I would like to put a visual to the whole team that's working in the background. I really appreciate the expertise and knowledge they pass it to me and to the whole team and the help they're providing for the team. So we have Andrew, we have Joyce, we have Lorraine, Lisa, Brittany, Min, and Michael. And Michael is a very important role in providing help with all the transfers, all disposals. So if you have any questions regarding transfers, if you have any knowledge of any PI or transfer to a different institution, please let us know as soon as possible. That helps us tremendously with our work to get ahead of time and prepare for the transfer smoothly. Any questions?
Question of curiosity. Tariffs. So let's say you get an S10 award and you're trying to purchase a large piece of equipment. now all of the sudden tariffs become an issue. How is the university addressing that?
I'll let the big boss answer that. Katie?
Alex, can you repeat that real quick? What aspect of the tariffs are you concerned with?
Um, it's a question of curiosity. So I have a PI, and this is actually going to happen through arts and sciences, but he's split with data science. He's got a just in time on a large piece of capital equipment, and he's having to deal with tariffs. Like this is going to be an issue. If you have a limited amount of money from the award, and then all of a sudden you have these extra costs that you weren't anticipating, what are we going to do about it?
We would need to obviously either cover it with available funds on the grant, but that's probably not possible given, the budget and what was projected. So another funding source would need to be identified and used. I'm not sure if leadership has gone to the level of identifying any other funding sources, but I think it would be anticipated that the schools and departments would, find other funding sources at their, discretion to be able to cover the additional expense.
Okay.
And that would become part of the capital equipment as well, right? Even if it,
Yes, I mean, if it increases the cost of the equipment, then 100% it would be capitalized on our books.
Let you guys know, I've already had one question from procurement regarding the tariffs. If you do have a requisition that's going to have a tariff on it, list it on a separate line. Do not add it into like the equipment line. Hopefully on the quote, they would reflect it that way. So if they don't, then, we can't break it out. But I already had a question yesterday about that, and we agreed that it'd be best to have it on one line item on the requisition.
Joyce, what do you do if you already have the quote and it's about to come in and you just got hit with the tariff, so the cost goes up, so you didn't have the opportunity to line item it out?
So what I would do in that case, Jeff, I would do a change order to the purchase order to add a line for that tariff. So when they go to match up the invoice with the PO, it will be accounted for.
All right, I'll let Faye know.
Thank you.
so I'm curious about the new, I don't know if NIH has suspended anything, but they were changing to a new threshold, going from 5,000 to 10,000. Do we know how that's gonna affect us at this time?
Think
So yeah, I mean, you're kind of referring to the updated uniform guidance that came out, I believe, last October. And that increased the ability for the threshold for equipment and subawards from 25,000 to 50,000 for subawards and 5,000 to 10,000 for equipment. The university is looking to implement those new thresholds in fiscal year 2027, but more communication on that front will be coming out in the next few weeks to months.
Andrew, where are we given everything with our negotiation of our rate with everything going on?
We have reaffirmed our current rate of 61.5%.
Okay. Well, thank you for that presentation, Mohammed. It was very informative.
Thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity.
Pass on the slides to me. I'll make sure they get sent out to the group.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay, so next up on our schedule is Steve Lichtenstein, who's the Assistant Dean in the Office of Grants and Contracts for the School of Medicine. and he will be presenting on the UFM tax that everyone pays to,
So,
not the BPR, who does it go to?
so I got suckered into this by you, Kathy. So, so can you see these slides?
Yes, we see them.
Yep.
So Katie Walker's here to keep me honest, and Katie works in the provost office, and is going to jump in and help me talk about from a provost perspective. So I'm Steve Lichtenstein. I work in the School of Medicine. I'm the assistant dean in the Grants and Contracts office, and I'm just going to give an overview of how UFM came about and talk about the couple of models that have been put in place, and then I'll try to answer some of the questions about UFM, but I think some of the technical things that might come up, Katie might jump in and probably end up helping me. But I'll try to give an overview of what UFM's about and what it stands for. So UFM is the university's financial model. And it started and what it is. So UFM's really around and what does it pay for? So UFM's really the university's model to really pay for shared services. And most larger universities need some kind of model to pay for, or a mechanism to pay for their shared services. So think of all the different things centrally that the university has, such as IT, HR, the Office of Sponsored Programs, student services, financial management, etc. And how do they get those things funded? Where does the money come from centrally? They're not really revenue generating offices that need to have their offices paid for, and where does that money come from? So the UFM mechanism is a mechanism that's used to try to fund those operations, and this is a means to try to get those funds reimbursed. University of Virginia has a responsibility central management, or RCM, financial model, and it started using tuition and F&A that were collected centrally for paying these, using different units and reimbursements to try to collect these. It started back in 2016, was the first model, version 1.0, when this was put into place. Revenues were allocated from different schools and units, and they were gathered. There were a lot of questions on how to gather this revenue, bring them in centrally, and what kind of drivers they were going to use to collect or allocate these different revenues and bring them back centrally to the different cost centers to drive the funds to reimburse the different cost centers. So they use, faculty FTEs, student FTEs, total sponsored research in the different schools, total research expenditures. There were 11 cost centers, each with its own metric. There were one or more drivers that were out there that they used to collect or drive this different revenue base. And then they were all subject to different tax allocations. And the theory being that the more they used of these different units, the more they would basically pay to more services they used of these different individual units, the more they would pay for the services. So the more, let's say the School of Medicine used of OSP, the more they would actually pay for those services. Well, there were some real issues basically around that. And some of the issues related to that were the way they budgeted some of these services in the first model that were detached from the way they budgeted it. They were budgeted centrally. The schools really couldn't allocate or come up with a central budget that was connected to how much the school was going to pay for those services. So they had no way to figure out how much of the school's budget was going to go against these central expenses, how they were a true disconnect between the costs and the service. So how much of that service was actually going to be used? Some of the, if you use more of the service of, let's say, IT services, and you needed it, how is that money going to be funded or funneled to that service from the school? So there was a real problem from a cost pool or a proportional standpoint from the unit, or a methodology standpoint from a unit, from a school perspective, or from a modeling perspective or a forecasting perspective from the way this was put in place from the first go around, from an institutional perspective, the way things were done. So they really looked at it, said we need to revise this, the way the tax rules were being done, and they changed things right around a couple of years ago in 2023, I believe. Is that right, Katie?
Yes, fiscal 23 was the latest version of the model.
Yeah. So now in 23, or I'm sorry, maybe it was 19, I guess, was the original model put in.
No, we had fiscal 15 was the first year, and then fiscal 23 was the most recent revision.
Okay. So in 2.0, the new model, it really uses a rolling 3-year average of how the taxes being done. So schools can really plan how their expenses, or really see a forecasted perspective of what the expenses or what the tax is really going to look like. They can really look at the impact of what that should be. And yeah, okay, expenses are really should be going up, but they can really see what that impact is. It's more of a flat perspective, but yeah, it should be more of a the impact should be more, the ability to see that should be more, I would say, planned versus a surprise to most of the schools. So there is a predictability about what the tax is, or the design of it, and that's why they went to like a rolling average. It's also based on a direct expense versus FTEs or student, a bunch of different drivers, the way the model was being done in the past. And they were trying to connect it, connect the revenue of the services better from a budgeting perspective. So it was more associated with the services that were being given from the different units, the cost centers, to the actual items that you were receiving versus, budgeting them first versus what you were going to get. So questions about how that, how that change actually happened? So if you look at, and I'll get, this might be a little confusing because maybe I should jump to this slide first. So there's a uses and a sources slide. And the provost office actually provides each cost center with funds to try to keep the sources somewhat flat. And I'm looking at Katie to kind of jump in here a little bit and maybe help me a little bit with this. So the provost office and some of the sources that we receive from like state appropriations or the medical center or some of those type of things where the university receives different items or revenues. Some of that money goes to those cost centers and tries to keep a funding of those 11 cost centers relatively flat. Then the school's portion or the tax that they are charged, it tries to keep that tax relatively flat or the 3-year average relatively flat.
Yeah, so what I might say, so in the Office of Financial Planning and Analysis, we're in finance, and what you're essentially seeing is a high level summary of the fund sources that we have that come in to our institutional cost center, and then how we send the money back out. So you can see the university tax, that's the 22% based on lagging 3 years of lagging actuals. That's the inflows from the schools and some special academic entities. You've got state appropriations, you have the per square foot facilities charge that the schools and special academic entities pay, recoveries that we get from medical center and UPG, which are not part of the academic division, as well as our auxiliaries are in there, the self-sufficiency tax that Law and Darden are subject to, and then a few other smaller local sources. And in total, that's the sources that we have available centrally to pay out all of the central services that Steve mentioned, ensure that the schools and special academic entities receive a level of operating support, provide funding for facilities, the strategic funds that Steve mentioned, that's primarily coming out of the university fund. We've set aside some money for recession needs, legal needs, things like that, that you see is that 15, and then some university other support. Those are just smaller subsidies going to some other small units. And so it just gives you an idea of the inflows and outflows. And then behind the scenes, we're also managing the color of money behind all of those.
Right. And then basically what happens then is there's like a facilities fee and an actual, what is the tax or the 22% actually derive from out of most schools based on that tax. And the average is about 8.24% is what it actually charges. So the UFM tax, the 2.0 from the facilities fee and the tax, it ends up being like a 12.996 to the unit. And that's the charge that most units end up paying. That's the 2.0 charge. And the 1.0 utility, the model was about 11.34%. So the difference between the two models to each school is roughly about the same, but it's about a 12% or 13% charge to each dollar that each school gets charged for an expense, is the way I look at it. So every dollar that the school spends, it's about a 13% charge to the current. If you want to think about every direct expense that the School of Medicine charge or the arts and science, the way the current model is working with the provost subsidizing or the money coming into the university is actually only really costing a unit or a school 13%. The way the taxes is working.
So each department or school pays about 13%
Right.
central fund.
Yeah, and then that money goes to help pay for OSP, uh, IT, HR, all the central administration type charges. Provost office, the deans, all the central administration, facilities, all of those type of things.
Okay. I guess that would include like IRB and animal.
Exactly. Well, anything under the central administration. So if you think about it that way, so yeah, so anything under the vice president of research office. So IRB, animal facilities, which is all under the VPR's office. Yeah.
There are some items that are still billed. IRB is
Yeah.
still out to units based on the number of proposals sent over to IRB for review in the different components of IRB. So that is still billed. Units
Back
still
to
see
the
things
school.
like their ITS headcount charge. There's still things that are billed.
Out. Yeah. Yeah, so the IRB actually charges back to the schools for services. So does that make sense to folks? So there are questions about?
So there's a question in the chat.
Oh, sorry, I can't see with my screen.
That's okay, I'll read it to you.
Yeah,
It
go
says,
ahead.
anticipating a future cut change to the FNA, how FNA is calculated, would we look to recover some of the UFM costs directly on grants for these support costs?
I mean, I think that's a question for all the different schools back to the provost on how UFM works, whether the model stays the same.
So in the question, if we're asking whether or not we could put either the UFM tax on a grant or the costs that are represented under the UFM tax, the answer for UFM tax is a definitive no. And for most costs recovered under UFM, the answer is also a definitive no because we have to follow federal guidance.
Yeah, and I would just add that it really depends on what comes out of the change. In current structure, none of those costs are allowable to just hit directly. That's why the FNA kind of rate is structured the way it is to recover for, indirect related costs to research. So something very, very drastic would have to change in, relayed by the government or approved for that to happen.
But I think another question would be, would the models stay the same? I think a lot of folks in the schools are, would the UFM model stay the same? And what would need to change from a school perspective with UFM to fund certain things?
Yeah, so we will we're due for a UFM review. One thing I will say is if we were to have any exclusions from the calculation, all that does, because we have a set amount we need to recover from, would be to push the tax rate up on things that remain in the calculation. So taking a really big example, if you were to exclude expenses on grants from the tax calculation, the tax rate would probably jump up to something like 35% on the funds that remain. So there's still a fixed amount to be recovered. And so that's something that we take really seriously when we do a review.
I think, Katie, one of the questions we get a lot from a research perspective is subcontracts. Since we don't recover, we only recover 50,000, the first 50 or 25 if, when we change, Andrew, and we can recover on the first 50 if we're allowed to do that under the new negotiated rate. And we lose a large portion of that. It's almost like we're being taxed on the portion we're losing when we subcontract out. and, for direct expenses on a subcontract, and, we're being taxed on those.
Yeah, I mean, they're recognizing that there is a certain level of administrative cost related to having subcontracts. Again, really anything that you pull out of the base tax calculation would potentially necessitate a tax increase on what remains. Subcontracts are obviously a sizable component, but not the biggest chunk of our grants and contracts, but it is pretty sizable. So if we were to make a change like that to the calculation, it would, number one, increase the complexity of the calculation and units' ability to project in the out years. And number two, like I said, it would probably push up the tax rate on the funds that remain. So it's all a balancing act.
A good example that I've heard used a lot of times, and we've used it, Katie and I specifically, in a bunch of different occasions, is that you have to think of all of our costs like a balloon. And if you squeeze one side of the balloon, the other side of the balloon is going to get bigger. It's still the same amount of air that you got to cover.
So what happens when the department, if the F&A rate is cut and the departments don't have the funding to pay the tax, what is going to happen at that point?
I would say first discussion needs to be with that dean to start talking about what that situation looks like.
Okay.
I know that the deans are having conversations with the provosts specifically around a lot of these questions, and a lot of them are still relatively unanswered. But I would say if a department's running into that specific issue, first contact is definitely to the dean, so that the dean is aware of what's going on and can enlighten the provost during their discussions.
Yeah, and I would add too, from a central perspective, although all expenses in all departments are in the calculation, we in no way dictate that the payments need to come from a particular fund source or from a particular department. So, we basically provide a number for a school. And that's why, to Mike's point, I think it's definitely starting a conversation with the dean first, and then the dean would have discussions with the provost as they're seeing issues.
Oh, awesome. Any other questions out there? All right, well, looks like there are no more questions. Steve, thank you very much for the presentation.
Thanks, guys.
Learning
Thanks,
about all
Kate.
this stuff. I would like to ask again if anybody like from the VPR or OSP or anyone has any announcements that they'd like to make to the group. And if not, I will give you back 5 minutes of your day and we'll conclude the meeting. Thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Kathy.
All did way better than me.
Y'all did great. Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you.
Yours was really good. I really appreciated that.
I'm sorry, it's my first time, so the questions I cannot answer above my pay grade.
No, you were great, and this was I think this was an incredibly helpful presentation. I actually sent my husband a Teams chat, and I said, I want to send you the link to the CoRA meeting so you can learn more about capital equipment. He tells me that, and he's like, I've been trying to troubleshoot a very complex thing all day, and I said, all right, well, I'll send you the slides.
Just tell him to come over. Or
I
call
know,
me.
I will. He's dealt with Mike Williams on some things, but I'm not sure that he's spoken with you yet. So, but I know they're coming.
that's the two slides I wanted to add, but
Yeah.
for the limitation of time, especially for the transfers and disposals, it's a whole two slides, but I feel like I'm gonna run out of time. So let's chill and do this later on. So
That's great. That would be great.
yeah,
No,
thank you so much.
very
Thank you.
good.
Thank you for
Thank
the
you.
opportunity. Take care.
Stopping
Bye.